My brother, Marcus, screamed that I was ruining the family. My father, Albert, told me to disappear. They drove me out. This morning, their desperate calls woke me. They don't know it yet, but they just walked right into the trap I've been setting for 6 months. This is where it all shattered, and you'll want to see how I picked up the pieces. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the ending. We love hearing from you. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fluorescent light of the conference room hummed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound that seemed to bore directly into my skull. It was the only sound. I had just finished my presentation, the final slide still glowing on the wall, a bar chart showing our company's cash flow nosediving into a canyon of red. So, as you can see, I said, my voice hoarse, if we don't enact these austerity measures immediately and freeze all non-essential expansion projects, we will be in default of our loan covenants in less than 30 days. I looked at the two men sitting across the table. My father, Albert Miller, patriarch of Miller and Son Construction, stared at his hands. He was 69 but looked 80. Beside him, my younger brother, Marcus, vibrated with a furious energy. His bespoke suit jacket was unbuttoned, his silk tie loosened. Austerity measures, Marcus finally spat, the words sounding like poison. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. That's always your answer, isn't it, Claire? Cut. Freeze. Stop. You're a glorified bookkeeper, and you're trying to pilot a battleship. Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice even. These aren't my opinions. These are the numbers. The summit project you greenlit, it's a black hole. The consultants you hired for the coastal expansion haven't produced a single viable blueprint, and they've billed us for $500,000. Growth costs money, he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The water glasses jumped. You have to spend money to make money. You're the reason this family is falling apart. Your negativity, your constant blockades, you're stifling us. I was stunned into silence. I, who had given up a partnership at a Chicago firm to come home and save this company 10 years ago. I, who hadn't taken a real vacation in 6 years. I, who personally balanced the books every single night, long after Marcus was out entertaining clients on the company dime. Dad, I turned to my father, my voice small, pleading. Dad, you see the reports. You know I'm right. Albert Miller, the man who taught me how to read a balance sheet, slowly lifted his head. His eyes were dull, defeated. He wouldn't look at me. He looked at Marcus, his golden boy, the visionary who was supposed to carry the Miller and Son name into the future. Claire, my father said, his voice gravelly, Marcus is right. You're stressing everyone out. This negativity is poison. What? The word was a breath, a tiny puff of disbelief. He needs room to work, Albert continued, still refusing to meet my gaze. He can't have you questioning his every move. Maybe it's better if you disappear for a while, take a leave of absence. Disappear. The word echoed in the humming silence. He wasn't just siding with Marcus, he was erasing me. He was choosing the son who was bankrupting them over the daughter who was trying to save them. Marcus stood there, a smug, triumphant smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. He had won. He had finally, definitively won. I looked at them, this tribunal of two who had just condemned me. The anger I should have felt was absent, replaced by a cold, hollowing emptiness. I felt nothing. It was the kind of calm that comes after a devastating explosion, when the air is still and silent, thick with dust. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself. I simply closed my laptop. The click was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. I gathered my legal pad and my pen, placing them neatly in my briefcase. I snapped the clasps shut. I stood up, smoothed the front of my skirt, and walked toward the door. Claire, wait, my father said, a flicker of panic in his voice. We'll keep you on the payroll, of course, for a while. He thought this was about money. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. I turned and looked at them one last time. My father, a coward, my brother, a fool. No, thank you, I said. My voice was clear, crisp, and utterly devoid of emotion. I quit. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently behind me, the click of the latch sounding like the final lock on a tomb. I walked past my office, past the pictures of company groundbreakings, past the reception desk. I didn't look at anyone. I walked out the front doors, into the blinding afternoon sun, and I never looked back. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound. It felt less like a wound and more like an AM. Putation. The first 12 hours were a blur. I drove to my small, quiet apartment on the other side of town, the one I kept because it was modest and efficient, and I let myself in. The silence of my own space was a relief. I sat on my sofa, still in my work clothes, for hours. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't make dinner. I just stared at the wall as the sun went down, tracing the patterns of the evening light as they crept across the carpet and disappeared. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I saw Marcus's name flash. A text. I ignored it. It buzzed again. My father. I ignored that too. Let them have their victory. Let them celebrate their brilliant coup. I finally moved when it was dark, my limbs stiff. I ran a bath, the water scalding hot. As I soaked, the numbness began to recede and the pain flooded in. It was a sharp, acidic grief. It wasn't just the company. Miller & Son was my grandfather's legacy. I had dedicated my entire adult life to protecting it. I hadn't just been the financial controller. I had been the ballast. I was the one who translated Marcus's wild, grandiose schemes into practical logistics. I was the one who patiently renegotiated vendor contracts when Marcus's promises fell through. I was the one who worked with the banks, massaging the numbers, building trust, and securing the credit lines that funded his vision. And my father who had always called me his rock. He had crumbled at the first sign of pressure, sacrificing me to appease his reckless son. The golden boy could do no wrong, while the boring daughter was disposable. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, the events of the afternoon replaying in my mind. The humming light, Marcus's sneer, my father's averted eyes. Maybe it's better if you disappear. My phone, which I'd left on the nightstand, remained dark. After those first few texts, the silence was absolute. They were probably toasting their new era of unbridled growth. I must have drifted off at some point because I was jolted awake by a noise. It was my phone, not just buzzing, but ringing. A shrill, panicked sound in the pre-dawn dark. I squinted at the screen. 6:04 a.m., my father. I let it go to voicemail. Immediately it rang again. My father, I silenced it. A second later, a text message came through from my father. Claire, answer the phone, it's an emergency. I stared at the words. An emergency? What emergency could they possibly have that didn't involve me? Then another call. This time, Marcus. I hadn't heard his ringtone in years. It was frantic, ringing once, twice, then hanging up. A text from Marcus, all caps. Pick up. What did you do? My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat. What did I do? I did exactly what they asked. I disappeared. Another text from Marcus. The bank, the accounts are frozen. Come back now. And then the one that made my blood run cold, from my father. Claire, please. Something's happened, something terrible. We need you. Please come back. I sat up in bed, the gray morning light filtering through the blinds. A cold, tight smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of grim, terrible vindication. Something's happened. Oh, they had no idea. They had no idea what was happening. They thought I was just their boring, spineless accountant. They thought I was just the woman who crunched the numbers and filed the reports. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgot who I really was. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call them back. I scrolled to a different name in my contacts. Susan, my best friend, my lawyer. I hit dial. She picked up on the first ring. Susan, I said, my voice steady. It's time, they took the bait. To understand what they had done, you have to understand what I had given up. 10 years ago, I was on the partner track at one of the biggest accounting firms in Chicago. I had my own condo overlooking the park, a thriving social life, and a future I had built entirely on my own. Then the call came. It was my father, Albert. The 2008 recession had hit the construction industry like a hammer, and Miller and Son was on the brink of collapse. My mother had just passed away, and my father was lost. Marcus, then 28, was long on charm and short on substance, booking development deals that never materialized and spending money they didn't have. "I need you, Claire," Albert had pleaded, his voice cracking. I can't lose your grandfather's company." So I came home. I took a 70% pay cut. I sold my condo and moved into a small apartment. For the first 2 years, I worked 90-hour weeks. I renegotiated every penny of their debt. I clawed the company back from the edge of bankruptcy, one line item at a time. I streamlined payroll, I built a new auditing system from scratch, and I slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt the trust with our banks and suppliers. And I put my own life on hold. My father and brother saw my competence not as a rank but as a utility. I was the plumbing. I wasn't exciting, I was just there, always there, making sure the water ran. Marcus, on the other hand, was the visionary. He was the one who flew first class to meet potential investors. He was the one who got the fawning profiles in the local business journal for innovative projects. The fact that those projects rarely broke even and were always funded by the credit lines I had secured was a detail Albert conveniently ignored. "He's the face of the company, Claire," Albert would tell me, patting my hand dismissively when I questioned Marcus's extravagant expense reports. "We need that energy, don't stifle him." Stifling, that was their word for accountability. The real trouble started about a year ago. Marcus brought in a new consulting group, a flashy team from out of state. They had a polished website, vague job titles, and an incredible talent for spending our money. Their leader was a man who went only by Rhodes, and he had an almost hypnotic effect on my brother. "Rhodes says we're thinking too small," Marcus would announce in meetings, his eyes gleaming. "We need to expand to the coast. Luxury condos, that's the future." "Marcus, we don't have the capital," I would argue, showing him the projections. "We'd be over-leveraged by a factor of 3. The bank will never approve the loan." "We don't need the bank," he'd snap. "We'll use operational funds, we'll pre-sell." "That's not how it works. That's not operational funds, that's our payroll and supplier capital." But I was just the negative bookkeeper. I went to my father, laying out my concerns in no uncertain terms. I showed him the preliminary reports on Rhodes, which were thin at best. I showed him the wire transfers Marcus was making for consulting fees that had zero documentation. "Albert, this is dangerous," I warned him. "This Rhodes character, he's a ghost, and Marcus he's not listening to reason." My father had looked at the report, then at me. His expression was one of profound, weary disappointment, not in Marcus, in me. "Your brother is trying to build something, Claire," he said, pushing the report back across his desk. "Your grandfather was a risk-taker. That's how this company was built. You're more like your mother, cautious. It's good to have, but it's not how you build a legacy." That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just favoritism, it was willful blindness. He saw Marcus's recklessness as legacy and my diligence as a hobby. That was the night I called Susan. "They're going to run it into the ground," I told her, my voice shaking with a cold rage I hadn't known I possessed. "And when they do, they're going to blame me." "So what are we going to do about it?" Susan asked, her voice pure, practical steel. "We're going to build a firewall," I said, "and a trap." For the next 6 months, I did my job, but I also did another. Every night after I left the office, I logged into a private, encrypted server from my home computer. I began to build a second set of books, a shadow ledger. I duplicated every single suspicious wire transfer Marcus initiated. I saved every email where I formally warned him and my father about the coastal project. I downloaded copies of the fraudulent invoices from Rhodes's shell company. I meticulously documented every single time Albert initialed a report he clearly hadn't read, approving expenditures against my express written advice. I was no longer just an accountant. I was a forensic investigator, and I was building a case. My one saving grace was that my father and brother were fundamentally lazy. They loved the idea of running a company, but not the work. They had given me, and only me, sole administrative access to the primary bank accounts and the master accounting software. They saw it as tedious grunt work. They never realized they had given the keys to the kingdom to the one person they were determined to betray. They thought they were caging me, but they had just locked me in the armory. And when they told me to disappear, they had no idea that I was the only thing standing between them and the bomb I had been watching them build. "They've done it," I said again, pacing my small living room as the sun's first rays hit the window. "The bank froze the accounts." "Of course they did," Susan's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the panicked texts still lighting up my phone. "You told me the covenants on the main loan agreement stated that any unapproved vendor payment over $250,000 would trigger an automatic review. How much did Marcus send to Rhodes yesterday?" "$500,000, I said. "He must have done it right after I walked out. He probably thought it was a celebration." "He thought he was free," Susan corrected. "He had no idea he was just triggering the alarm you set. The bank's fraud department would have flagged it within an hour. By freezing the accounts, they've just preserved." "The crime scene, it's perfect. So what's your next move? They're begging you to come back." "I'm not going back," I said, the resolve hardening in my voice. "Not to the office, not to them. I'm going to the bank." "Not yet," Susan said firmly. "You don't go to them. They come to you. You're no longer an employee, Claire. You're a material witness. And more importantly, you're the only one who can give them the answers they need. Right now, Albert and Marcus are in a burning building with no fire extinguisher. You're not going to run in and save them. You're going to wait for them to crawl out, and then you're going to dictate the terms of their rescue." She was right. My first instinct was to rush in to fix it. That's what I had always done. But not this time. This time, they would feel the full weight of their incompetence. "So I wait," I asked. "You wait for their panic to peak, and in the meantime, we prepare." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Susan came to my apartment, and we converted my dining table into a war room. We opened the encrypted file, my shadow ledger. It was all there, 6 months of meticulous, damning evidence. "This is beautiful," Susan murmured, scrolling through the spreadsheets. "Wire transfers, time-stamped emails, forged invoices. Claire, this isn't just gross negligence. This is wire fraud. Marcus could go to jail." A pang of something twisted in my gut. Jail. This was my brother. "That's not the goal," I said, more to myself than to Susan. "The goal is to save the company, from him." "To save the company, you have to sever the limb," Susan said, her eyes meeting mine. "You can't hesitate, Claire. They didn't. They threw you to the wolves without a second thought. You need to be prepared for what this means." I took a deep breath. I am. My phone was now exploding. I had 17 missed calls from my father, 9 from Marcus, and most surprisingly, 3 from our company's longtime attorney, a man named Henderson. They were pulling out all the stops. At 10:00 a.m., I finally answered a call. It was Albert. "Claire, thank goodness." His voice was thin, breathless with panic. "You have to come down here, the bank. They've locked us out. The auditors are here. They're saying there are irregularities. Marcus can't get into the system. It's a mess, honey. You have to fix this." Honey, he hadn't called me that in years. "Fix what, Dad?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. Susan gave me a sharp nod. "I don't know, all of it. The payroll file is due today, and we can't access it. The bank manager won't even speak to me. He's asking for you." "I don't work there anymore, remember?" I said. "You told me to disappear." "Claire, this is not the time for jokes," he yelled, the panic turning to his familiar anger. "I'm not joking," I replied. "I am no longer an employee of Miller & Son. I have no authority to fix anything. And frankly, I have no interest." You can't do this," he sputtered. This is your family, your name. You and Marcus were the ones so concerned about the family name yesterday, I said. You're the ones in charge, so you handle it. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. Good, Susan said. Now we send one email to the bank. I drafted it carefully, with Susan dictating the legal language. It was addressed to Mr. Davies, the bank's regional vice president, the man I had cultivated a relationship with for a decade. Dear Mr. Davies, I was informed this morning of an account freeze and an emergency audit at Miller & Son. As I am no longer an employee of the company as of yesterday, I cannot speak for them. However, as the former financial controller with sole administrative access, I believe I have critical information pertaining to the irregularities your team has likely flagged. I have compiled a comprehensive file on this matter. I am available to meet with my legal counsel at your convenience. Sincerely, Claire Miller. And send, I said. We didn't have to wait long. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. It wasn't my father. It was Mr. Davies. Claire, he said, and his voice was pure, unadulterated relief. Thank God you called. What on earth is going on down here? Your brother is threatening to sue us, and your father looks like he's seen a ghost. They can't answer a single question. That's why I'm calling, Mr. Davies, I said. I can. Can you, your audit team, my father, and my brother be at my attorney's office in 1 hour? There was a pause. Your attorney's office. That's correct, I said. I'll text you the address. We have a lot to discuss. Susan's office was on the 12th floor of a glass and steel building downtown. It was minimalist, expensive, and intimidating. When the receptionist showed us to the main conference room, I felt a surge of power. This was my turf. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the gray skyline. Susan, ND, I took our seats on one side, my laptop and a single, thick binder in front of me. My father and Marcus arrived exactly on time, which was a first. They looked terrible. Marcus's usually perfect hair was disheveled and his suit was rumpled. He looked like he hadn't slept. My father, Albert, just looked broken. His face was ashen, his shoulders slumped. What is this, Claire? Marcus demanded as soon as he entered, his voice a poor attempt at his usual bluster. Why are we at a lawyer's office? You're supposed to be at the bank fixing this. Please sit down, Susan said, her voice cutting through his anger. Ms. Miller is no longer your employee. She is here as a courtesy. They sat reluctantly. The bank accounts are frozen, Claire, my father said, his voice pleading. Payroll is due, our suppliers. They're all going to walk. You have to tell the bank to unfreeze it. I can't do that, I said quietly. What do you mean you can't? Marcus snapped. You're the only one with the passwords. I mean, I can't ask them to unfreeze accounts that were rightfully frozen for cause, I said, my gaze level. The bank is responding to a $500,000 unapproved wire transfer to an unvetted offshore entity. A wire transfer you made, Marcus, less than an hour after you, and Dad threw me out. Marcus's face went white. My father looked from me to Marcus, his brow furrowed in confusion. What offshore? The consulting fees for roads, I said. The final payment on the coastal project. The one I told you both would bankrupt us. That's a lie, Marcus said, finding his voice. It was a legitimate business expense. You're trying to sabotage me. Am I? I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. I didn't open the shadow ledger. Not yet. I just opened the company's internal server, the one I still had access to. I pulled up the wire authorization. This is your digital signature, Marcus, on an invoice from Rhodes Global Strategies, a company registered in the Cayman Islands. An invoice that has no purchase order, no contract number, and no supporting documentation. You pushed it through the system using an executive override, knowing I was gone and couldn't stop you. My father squinted at the screen. Marcus, what is this? It's just paperwork, Dad, Marcus said, his voice rising in panic. She's trying to confuse you with her bean counter nonsense. The deal is solid. Is it, Marcus? I asked. Is the deal solid? Because I also pulled the preliminary engineering reports from the geological survey. The land you're trying to build on, it's unstable. The soil won't support the foundation you've designed. The entire summit project is unbuildable. You've spent, or rather, you've wired, $1.2 million to a ghost for a project on a swamp. My father made a small, choking sound. You're lying, Marcus whispered, but all the fight had gone out of him. He knew I had him. This is just the tip of the iceberg, I said. I looked past my brother to my father. You asked me to disappear. You told me I was the poison. You sided with him. You sat there and let your son, who has been actively defrauding your company, Granddad's company, accuse me of ruining it. Claire, I didn't know, Albert whispered. He looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. Marcus, is this true? Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at me, his expression a toxic brew of hatred and fear. You did this, he seethed. You set me up. You set yourself up, Marcus, I said, my voice as cold as the glass on the table. I just did my job. I kept the records you tried to hide. Before he could respond, the door opened, and the receptionist showed in Mr. Davies from the bank, along with 2 other people in severe suits, who I correctly identified as the audit team. Mr. Davies, Susan said, standing up. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. Claire was just about to begin her presentation. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. My father just sank lower in his chair, a ship taking on water. The confrontation was over. The execution was about to begin. Mr. Davies and his team sat down, their faces grim. They clearly were not here for a friendly chat. Claire, Davies began, foregoing any pleasantries, I'll be blunt. Our audit team has been running diagnostics all morning. What we're seeing, it's not just irregularities. We're seeing a pattern of high-value transfers to non-standard vendors, shell corporations, and offshore accounts. We're seeing, well, it looks a lot like fraud, and it all seems to originate from your brother's terminal. Marcus, who had been silent, sprang to life. That's ridiculous. Our company is expanding. Those are normal operational costs. He pointed a trembling finger at me, has been sabotaging my projects for a year. She's locked me out of the system and is feeding you lies to cover her own incompetence. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt. Davies, a banker for 30 years, just looked at him with an expression of profound boredom. Mr. Miller, Davies said, your operational costs have no contracts attached, and the account you wired $500,000 to yesterday was flagged by the Treasury Department. Your entire company's assets are now frozen, pending a full forensic investigation. My father, Albert, finally spoke. His voice was a dry rattle. Mr. Davies, surely this is a misunderstanding. Marcus, he's just ambitious. Claire, tell them we can fix this. It's just a cash flow problem, right? He was still looking for me to save him, to lie for Marcus. I looked at my father, and the last shred of pity I felt for him evaporated. No, Dad, I said, my voice clear and carrying across the table. It's not a misunderstanding, and it's not a cash flow problem. I turned to Mr. Davies. Gentlemen, what your audit team has found in the last 3 hours, I have been documenting for the last 6 months. I clicked a button on my laptop. The large monitor on the conference room wall flickered to life. It wasn't our company server. It was my private, encrypted server. My shadow ledger. What is this? Davies leaned forward, his eyes sharp. This, I said, is the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use emotional language. I simply presented the facts. I started with the Summit project. I showed them the initial, legitimate geological report that I had commissioned, which clearly stated the land was unsuitable. Then, I showed them the second, forged report that Marcus had submitted to the board, our father, to get the project approved. My father gasped. I never saw the first report. I emailed it to you on March 14th, I said, not looking at him. And you initialed the project binder, which included the forged report, on March 16th. I moved on. I showed them the Shell Corporation, Rhodes Global Strategies. Susan had done her work. I projected a slide showing the company's incorporation documents. It was registered to a holding company, which was, in turn, registered to a man named Chad Peterson. Who is Chad Peterson? Davies asked. Marcus's fraternity brother from college, I supplied. He's a nightclub promoter in Miami, not a construction consultant. I showed them the timeline. $1.2 million, wired over 6 months in 6 separate payments, all coded as consulting or geological surveying. Then I went deeper. It wasn't just the Summit project. Marcus had been using the company as his personal piggy bank for years. I showed them the $80,000 marketing expense that was actually a down payment on his Porsche. I showed them the client dinners that were, in fact, bar tabs from his vacations. I showed them the vendor contract for a tech supplier that was just another shell company, funneling money directly back to his own personal account. With every click, my father sank lower. Marcus had gone from white to a sickly, greenish-gray. He was breathing heavily. It's not true, Marcus stammered, but his eyes were darting toward the door. She faked those. She's the one with the passwords. She did all this to frame me. Mr. Miller, one of the auditors spoke up for the first time, his voice flat. We've been cross-referencing our own logs with Ms. Miller's data. The wire transfers, they all originated from the IP address of your home office, not the main company server. And they were all authorized using two-factor authentication tied to your cell phone number. Ms. Miller's data is 100% accurate. The room was silent. The trap had snapped shut. My father, Albert, slowly turned his head to look at his son. It was the slowest movement I had ever seen him make. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow. Marcus, Albert said. His voice was barely audible. My boy, what did you do? Marcus just stared at him, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. He's a thief, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but brutal. He's not a visionary, he's not ambitious, he's a thief. And you held the door open for him. You told him what a great job he was doing while he was stealing our grandfather's legacy from under our noses. And you told me to disappear. My father's face crumpled. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time in my memory, he began to sob. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs of a man whose entire world had just been obliterated. Marcus looked at his crying father, then at me, then at the bankers. His expression of fear hardened into one of pure, venomous rage. He lunged, not at me. He lunged across the table at my laptop, his hands outstretched like claws. I'll destroy it, I'll destroy all of it. He never made it. Susan, who had been sitting silently, was on her feet in an instant. She intercepted his lunge, shoving H. I am back into his chair, with a force that shocked me. Don't you dare, she hissed, her voice terrifying. You're done. Sit down, or I will have security drag you out of here. Marcus, stunned, fell back into his chair. The fight was over. The climax had passed, not with a bang, but with a whimper and a sob. The silence that followed Marcus's lunge was absolute, broken only by our father's muffled crying. Mr. Davies, the banker, looked from the sobbing patriarch to the seething son, and finally to me. His face was a mask of cold, professional fury. Well, Davies said, his voice dripping with ice. This has been illuminating, Mr. Miller, he addressed Marcus, who was breathing hard. The bank will be filing a formal criminal complaint. This is no longer a business matter, it's a legal one. No, Albert's head shot up, his face blotchy and tear-streaked. No, please, he's my son, it's a family matter, we can pay it back. Claire can fix it, right? We can pay it back. He was still trying to protect him, still trying to bundle us together. I looked at my father, my heart a cold, hard stone. No, I said. Susan stepped forward, placing her hands flat on the table. Gentlemen, she addressed Davies and his team, we understand the bank's position. However, my client, she motioned to me, has a proposal. Davies raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure what proposal you could make, counselor. We're looking at millions in misappropriated funds. The company is insolvent. The company is not insolvent, I said, taking over. The company is mismanaged, terribly. I clicked to the final tab on my spreadsheet. This is the company, minus Marcus's fraudulent activity. These are the performing assets. These are the contracts I personally negotiated, which are still profitable. The core business is sound. It was always sound. It was just being bled dry by a parasite. I looked at Davies. You file a criminal complaint and this hits the papers. Miller and Son Construction is finished. The name is mud. Your loan is worthless. You'll get pennies on the dollar after a protracted bankruptcy. Everyone here, I motioned to the auditors, knows I'm right. They didn't move, but I had their full attention. Or, I continued, you take my proposal, we handle this, quietly as a family, and as a bank. What's the proposal? Davies asked, his eyes narrow. First, I said, Marcus signs over his 49% stake in the company, all of it, to me, today. He will also sign a legally binding document, drafted by my attorney, confessing to the misappropriation of funds. This document will be held by the bank. If he ever steps foot in the company or violates a non-disclosure agreement, you file the report. It's the only leverage that will work. Marcus looked like he was about to speak, but Susan shot him a look that silenced him. Second, I said, my father Albert will sign over his 51% controlling interest. All of it. To me, he will be given a small, fixed pension and the title of Chairman Emeritus, but he will have zero operational or financial authority. Effective immediately. My father looked at me, his eyes wide. This was not the fix he'd been expecting. He thought I would save them. He didn't realize I was staging a coup. And third, I said, the bank agrees to restructure the debt. You will not call the loan. You will give me 90 days. I will liquidate the Summit project assets, what's left of them. I will terminate all fraudulent contracts. I will personally oversee the recovery of as much of the stolen money as possible, and I will get your payments back on track. I leaned forward. You've worked with me for 10 years, Mr. Davies. You know my numbers. You know I have never, ever been late on a payment. You can either liquidate this company and take a massive loss, or you can bet on the only person in this family who has ever known how to run it. What's it going to be? Davies was silent for a full minute. He looked at my spreadsheet. He looked at my father, who was a broken man. He looked at Marcus, who was a cornered animal. And then he looked at me. Draft the paperwork, counselor, he said to Susan. A flurry of activity. Susan, ever prepared, already had the share transfer documents and the confession printed. She laid them in front of Marcus. You can't make me, he snarled. I'm not, Susan said. He is. She nodded to Davies, who was already pulling out his phone. The alternative is that Mr. Davies calls the police. Right now, you'll be in a holding cell by dinner, your choice. Marcus's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He looked at me, his eyes promising a revenge he could never deliver. He signed. He initialed the confession, his movements jerky and violent. Then Susan placed the second set of documents in front of my father. Dad, I said softly. He looked at the papers, he looked at his son, he looked at me, he had lost everything. His son was a thief, his daughter was an executioner, the legacy was in ruins. You planned this, he whispered. You knew. I hoped I would never have to use it, I replied, and it was the truth. I gave you every chance to see the truth. You chose to be blind, now sign, or we all go down. Albert Miller, the great patriarch, picked up the pen. His hand was steadier than his son's. He signed away his company. He signed away his name. He signed away his legacy. He pushed the papers back to Susan. It's done, Susan said, gathering the documents. Indeed, Davies said, standing up. He looked at me. Ms. Miller, I expect an updated P&L report on my desk by Monday. Don't make me regret this. You won't, I said. He and his team filed out. It was just the three of us again, the broken family. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping. He didn't look at me, he didn't look at his father. He just walked to the door, a man with nothing, and left. Now it was just me and Albert. He sat there, staring at the polished table. "Claire," he said, his voice a ghost. What happens now?" I stood up and put my laptop back in my briefcase. I snapped the latches shut. "Now," I said, "I go to work. I have a company to save." I walked out of the conference room, leaving him alone in the wreckage. The 90 days that followed were the hardest of my life. They were also the most rewarding. The moment I stepped back into the offices of Miller & Son, now just Miller Construction, as my first act as CEO was to legally change the name, the atmosphere was thick with fear. Employees I had known for years wouldn't meet my eye. They'd heard the rumors, the frozen accounts, the fight, the ousting of Albert and Marcus. They assumed the company was finished. I called an all-hands meeting in the lobby. "There are going to be a lot of changes," I told them, my voice echoing in the quiet. "But I will not lie to you, we were betrayed. Not by market forces, not by a competitor, but from within. Marcus Miller is gone. Albert Miller is retired. The company was bled, but the heart is strong. We will survive, but I need you." I spent the next month in a whirlwind of forensic accounting and brutal negotiations. I hired Susan's firm to go after Rhodes and Chad Peterson. We managed to freeze and recover nearly $400,000 of the stolen money before the rest vanished. I sold the useless Summit Project land at a 60% loss, but it was cash in hand. I fired the consultants and cut Marcus's entire Vanity Project division. It was painful, but with every cut, the company's pulse grew stronger. I met with our suppliers one by one. I showed them the real books. I showed them my plan. "I know what we owe you," I told them. "And I know my family broke your trust. All I can give you is my word. I will make this right." To my surprise, they stayed. They had worked with me for years. They knew my word was good. I worked from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. I was the first one in and the last one out. I didn't just manage the books, I went to the job sites. I learned the names of the foremen. I earned their respect, not with false charm, but with competence. True to my word, on day 89, I walked into Mr. Davies' office at the bank. I placed the quarterly report and a cashier's check for the first, full, on-time restructured loan payment on his desk. He looked at the numbers, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. We weren't just solvent, we were profitable. "Well, I'll be," he said. "You did it, Ms. Miller." "I told you I would, Mr. Davies," I said, "and please call me Claire." My life was no longer about them, it was about this. The work, the legacy I was actually saving. I saw my father 2 weeks later. He had called and asked to meet for coffee. I almost said no, but I found I didn't hate him anymore. I just felt tired. He was waiting at a small cafe. He looked older. He had lost weight. He was no longer the patriarch, just an old man. "Hello, Claire," he said. "Dad." We sat in silence for a moment. He stirred his coffee, though he drank it black. The guys at the quarry, they said you were there last week," he said. "They said you were amazing. You spotted a flaw in the load-bearing calculations, saved them a lot of trouble." I just looked at the numbers, I said. "No," he said, finally looking up. His eyes were clear for the first time. The denial was gone. You were always the one, the real builder. I couldn't see it." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His skin was dry and papery. "I was a fool, Claire," he said, his voice thick. "I was so desperate to see a version of myself in Marcus. I was blind to the person who was actually holding us all up. I was a coward, and I am so sorry for what I did, for what I let him do." A single tear rolled down his cheek. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at our hands, his which had built so much, mine which had saved it. "I'm working on it, Dad," I said, and I was. I didn't see Marcus. Susan's legal threats had been effective. He was in Miami, living with his friend Chad. his name and reputation in our hometown completely destroyed. He would never work in this industry again. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. That evening, I left the office at a reasonable 6 p.m. As I walked to my car, I looked up at the sign on the building. Miller Construction. It was a good name, a strong name. I had saved my grandfather's company. I had saved my father from himself. And in the process, I had finally saved myself. I got in my car, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I drove home with the windows down and the music on.